is going to be on a fantastic book series that I've recently come across the last couple of months, and it's going to be on one of my favourite battles, and a battle very much neglected, definitely for a boy in Wales, is Culloden, which was the last pitched battle in the British Isles between competing factions within Britain over the British state. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a quick look at the book itself. So this book is, like I say, Culloden. It is the part of the Great Battle series, and it's written by Murray Pittock. It came out in 2016, and it is quite pricey at $12.99. I don't mind paying that for this book series because it does come as a hardcover, and I have the book here. I can show you. It is a fantastic book series. So here we are. I've read this one recently. I think I finished this one about a month ago. Just to give it a little bit of a summary for people who don't know too much about the battle or the Jacobite history itself. So what you had in the 17th century Britain, for quite a few years you had different dynasties. We're all taught in school the different dynasties in British history, the Plantagenets, all the way down to the Tudors and the Stewarts. And this is where, with the Stewart dynasty, things started to go awry for the monarchy in Britain. So you had in the English Civil War competition between the absolute monarchy of a king, that they had the right to do as they pleased, and that the consent of the governed wasn't anything to be entertained whatsoever, even by nobility, let alone peasantry within Britain. And there were others in the in British Parliament, as it was at the time, which could be dismissed or organised at the whims of the king, mainly for tax purposes or to alleviate some dissatisfaction in the country. And Parliament chose to oppose the king. It then went to the battlefield. Protracted war over a few years in the 1600s. It led to the defeat of the royalist army and the monarchy, and the king at the time, Charles I, was executed. It was mainly a clique within the parliamentarian army of Puritans who were you could say that they were fundamentalist Christians from a very modest, very meagre background, probably akin to some of the, if you look at it from an American point of view, very akin to some of the pilgrims who left in the 1600s to go to the Americas, very much in that tradition. But fast forward a little bit later on, Britain experimented with a republic, and you had the Commonwealth, which at the time included Scotland, England, and Ireland. Wales at the time was governed solely through England, so it was the three kingdoms were England, Scotland, and Ireland were the Commonwealth, and that lasted with, effectively, you had what was called a Lord Protector. Effectively, it was I wouldn't say a dictatorship, but it was a military. The state was run like a military governor. The powers were effectively a king, but the name king didn't sit too well with Oliver Cromwell, who was one of the main generals in the parliamentarian army and one of the drivers later on then for the execution of the king, and that there was no reproach possible. So what had happened after Britain's short spell with republicanism was that Oliver Cromwell died. His son was left in charge as the new Lord Protector, so hereditary, very akin to a monarchy. And unfortunately, the state just collapsed around him. You had a Stewart, the son of the executed king, already in Rome and in France at the time, which was Charles II. Now, Charles II came back, the restoration of the crown in Britain, and that lasted all the way the Stewart dynasty until 1689, where 1688-89, where you had what was called the Glorious Revolution. And effectively what happened was that it was a struggle at the time over, again, religion, where there was a sizable difference in Britain between Catholic and Protestant, and we were due to have a Catholic king, which was a Stewart by the name of James, and a bunch of parliamentarians decided to invite, but they invited the King of the Netherlands, which was William of Orange, into Great Britain to become king, because he was married to the, I believe it was the niece or the daughter of James, and so that legitimacy was already set there. But as for invitation, I mean, he did bring thousands of Dutch troops at the time. So, and it was a lot of geopolitical move as well, because the Dutch were opposed to Catholic France and also Catholic Austria. So, in order to sort of maintain a Protestant bulwark against those enemies on the continent, they couldn't have Britain then return into a Catholic fold, or at least a sort of a neutral stance. So that was what that was all about. Then what happened then is that you still had the Stewart line calling for legitimacy, that they were the legitimate rulers of Great Britain and Ireland. And effectively what happened was that you had a series of uprisings, mainly in the heartlands of where the Stewarts originated, which was you had uprisings in Northern Ireland, you had uprising in Scotland in 1689. Again, there was Jacobite uprisings in 1715, and once more there were uprisings in 1745. So this is quite a long time after this had happened, and effectively the Stewart shadow government, as it was being propped up by France, the enemy of Great Britain at the time. So what happened was, prior to Culloden, you had another uprising in 1745, and a Stewart by the name of Bonnie Prince Charles Edward Stewart, landed in Scotland, managed to gather support from various clans. There were also those in England and across Ireland, Wales and Scotland who saw him as and the family as the legitimate heirs to the British Crown, irrespective of, and it came from quite a wide array of people. So it was men, women, different religious backgrounds, even different sort of political persuasions as well. But they all believed that they all believed and they all fought for Charles Edward Stewart. So initially this uprising actually went pretty well. Britain was preoccupied at the time with fighting on the continent against Louis XV's French Empire, and this was Culloden and the Jacobite uprising. And we in Britain, I mean, for sure for Scottish history fans, it is a major part of their history, and that's not to denigrate that, but I mean, in terms of the sort of geopolitical landscape at the time, the French considered the uprising a distraction that they could use against the British to maybe knock them out of conflict. This was an itch that the British state needed to scratch as well to get. And it did actually get to the point where Charles Edward Stewart did march significantly into England and got as far as Derby, I believe, before being talked out of it by one of his chief commanders, and took the advice that the army was to turn around and return to Scotland. And on the way, all the momentum that had been built up, the small-scale battles, the captured areas, the support that they had got started to dwindle, and that momentum definitely shifted in favour of the British state. And what happened was that this army then effectively was being dwindling day by day, week by week, month by month, and at Culloden Moor, one of the stands was made there against one of the better generals in the British Army, which was the Duke of Cumberland. He was one of the princes of the realm, and he was a formidable general in British history, and was. I would give one recommendation, and that would be if you do want to follow up on Scottish history. There is a channel presented by Bruce Fumey, which is Scottish History Tours. He's a fantastic presenter, much better than myself, but his detail of the Culloden campaign is fantastic, and what I would say is that he presents it in such a way that he would give extra detail. But going back to the actual battle itself at Culloden Moor, it was the climactic battle, really did effectively then settle the crown once and for all. If Charles Edward Stewart could somehow muster a backs against the wall victory, then possibly victory was on the cards. But I think that the writing was on the wall, and history proves right that the Jacobite defeat was imminent. And at Culloden is where the British Army marched against the Stewart Army and against the Jacobite Army. Now, where I really enjoyed this book and what really reshaped my sort of knowledge of the battle is that there's quite a few famous paintings of later on, years after the battle, of what people say how it went, and obviously government propaganda at the time. It showed the British Army as resourced, red-coated, equipped, professional, strong, upright, clean, industrious, organised, and the propaganda that was put across about the Jacobite army was that it was a ragtag bunch of Highland warriors running around in kilts with axes, targets, or as we would say, they were called targets, but they were also shields. The Jacobite army was anything but, and I think that we have to divorce ourselves of the knowledge that it was a exclusive Scottish uprising as well. You had in the Jacobite army, you had a significant representation from what was called the Royal Ecossais. So they were a regiment within the French army of Scottish volunteers, but Scottish servicemen, Scottish soldiers. You also had French then. You had Highlanders. You had everyone all across. You had Lowlanders, Highlanders, Irish, English royalists. So there's quite a wide array of people who actually did fight for the Jacobites. And one thing I would say as well is that the sort of the thought of the Jacobites as an exclusive Highland, Gaelic-speaking, savage sort of army, that is purely government propaganda. If you ever get the chance, and I certainly hope I get the chance to go to the battlefield at Culloden, they have a fantastic representation of how the battle went itself, but they've recovered some fantastic artifacts as well of what people were carrying, so musket and shot, sidearm weapons, broadswords, axes, targets, which is the shields, the cannons. The thing is, the Jacobite army it wasn't the British army. It wasn't as well equipped. It wasn't as well provisioned, but it was still an army nonetheless, and it was a good army. It was an army good enough to gobble up a lot of land between Scotland and Derby in the Midlands before they decided to shoot themselves in the foot effectively and retreat back to Scotland. I say retreat, in hindsight it wasn't a retreat, it was a strategic withdrawal back to Scotland. But unfortunately, that was their death knell. And but I found it very interesting that, even years later, you look at a lot of the um, history documentaries on BBC and Channel 4, Channel 5, and he still parrots the government propaganda that it was a ragtag army. I mean, the primary weapon within the Jacobite army was the musket. It's exactly the same as the British army. You did have the Highland Charge, of a significant portion of the army, and effectively it was an ineffective Highland Charge because of the conditions on Culloden Moor and the mist coming off the river, off the is it the loch or the sea? One of them. The mist and the conditions which made the Highland Charge ineffective. But the fact of the matter is, this was a well-equipped army, and I found that the book and Murray Pittock does a very, very good job of illustrating that, showing you that, and dispelling any myths. And in fairness to him, he does give you the original, the sort of standard take that you would get from a generalised sort of mainstream view of the battle itself. But another part which I thought was very, very interesting was, as part of the government propaganda, you have a line where the government and the media, and in particular the British later imperialism, sort of justified the defeat of the Jacobites and then the subsequent savagery against the Highland population, against the Jacobite Stewart supporting Catholic supporting population of Scotland and Ireland, and the savagery was justified in the government's words because they thought that this was a turning point in the history of Britain. That this war but what led after this war was a climactic battle between the old Britain and the new Britain. You had the old Britain, which was pretty much what Britain now in 2021 is descending into, which is a federated sort of self-interested collection, loose collection, under a strong executive. So previously by a king, and then by a Commonwealth Lord Protector, and then by a king again. But the kings swapped hats. Same hat, different king. And then the justification was that they were making a new Britain. That the old Britain was dead. The new Britain was going to be order, mercantilism. It was going to be free trade. It was going to be projecting British imperial power abroad and at home. It was going to be using the levers of what they were at the time, which was advanced civilization, to take to the rest of the world and to take corners of the world and etch out the further designs of the British Empire and the elite in which really sort of drove that empire on itself as well. So whilst there is obviously elements of truth in that argument, where you have the fork in the road between the old and the new, I don't think it is as simple as it was never as simple as that, really. For instance, you did have later on the projection of British might across North America after the Culloden campaign. You did have what was called the 7 Years' War, or also called the French and Indian War in North America, where Britain took over France's colonial possessions in Canada and also in India, which was quite successful and severely damaged the French crown to the point that later on they went into revolution later on in the 18th century. But the resentment and the imperialist way in which the British state went about its business of the Jacobite campaign and then the latter campaign, and the way in which the British state dealt with its colonies in America, that then fomented effectively the uprising in America and the revolution which led to the birth of the United States. And subsequently, again, just to give a nod to Bruce Fumey, there was a fantastic array of ex-Jacobite people fighting the Jacobite wars on either side, who then went and aided the Americans or aided the British in the American Revolution. And there's quite a few fantastic stories. So I would, if you are interested in this topic, I would suggest you do a little bit more reading around it. But again, Culloden is a sensitive one because the savagery in which followed after is still felt even today between the resentment between the English and the Scottish. We all know the film Braveheart and the founding and the independence of the Scottish people, but even Culloden later on, we still, you still have knowledge of what was effectively imposed upon the Scottish people, although there were a significant amount of clans and Scots in the British Army fighting against the Jacobite army also at the time. So it wasn't exclusively an England versus Scotland war or an England versus Scotland campaign. It was a lot more mixed than that, but still there are some corners, particularly Highland corners, where the resentment is still felt, and that is understandable. You only have to come to where I'm from in Wales to see that we haven't been independent since the 1100s, 1300s, if that, and we still have, as a population, there is significant resentment to the English state, as I would say, non-English people in itself. Understandably, there is still an element of Scottish resentment towards the British state and the English elite that drove this campaign. But overall, I thought this book was absolutely superb, and it's a brilliant start to the Great Battles set that I've started to collect. They are quite expensive books, and I would say I've gone out my way to get these brand new because they are hardback. It is part of a collection. I do enjoy the individual battles themselves, and I'm quite prepared to pay the money for them. But there are a couple of different ones I have from the series, so I can show you here. So I currently read Lutzen. So Lutzen is a battle from the 30 Years' War, which was effectively a sectarian war between. It was a sectarian war and a political war between the Protestant and Catholic forces of Europe. So Lutzen was a battle where the Protestant forces under the Swedish king Gustav Adolf fought against the Austrian Holy Roman Empire Habsburg forces at Lutzen. So that's a fantastic book to catch that one if you want to. Then we've got one of the classics, Agincourt by Anne Curry. Now, Anne Curry is one of the best writers on medieval France during the English occupation of medieval France and of the campaign of Henry V. So this book is fantastic. I haven't read it yet, but can't wait to read it. I know quite a bit about the battle. It is certainly part of British folklore. About the battle in Agincourt. So you have the outnumbered, absolutely shattered English invading army in France who were desperately looking to retreat to Calais to reprovision the army. of Henry V, and they were cut off by a much larger 20,000 force of pretty much French nobility, French dukes, everybody you could, pretty much everybody was coming there. It was going to be the killing fields as far as the French were concerned. They were coming there to get their spurs and to dispel the English invaders and to make a mockery of the English king. Unfortunately, the longbowmen and the weather played its part, and the French were lured into a huge trap where they were bogged down and mired in a field and pretty much hacked and shot to death whilst they were carrying massive heavy armour, and the English were a lot more, although they were lighter in terms of numbers, they were lighter also in terms of their armour and what they were able to offer with the balance of their army. Anyways, that's a fantastic book, so Agincourt, love that. Next one then is Thermopylae. So I haven't read too much about the ancient battles, particularly Thermopylae and what's the one from 300? I can't remember. Anyways, Thermopylae, I'm very much looking forward to reading this, just because it is a bit of a blind spot. I've never really read around a lot of individual ancient history battles, so I'm going to make a start with this one, and brilliant because this is part of the Great Battles set as well, so pick that one up. And then lastly, just because I'm a big fan of the Crusades history, this one by John French is called Hattin. So Hattin was a battle of the Second Crusade, I would say. I think it's the Second Crusade, where under the Abbasid general, which was Saladin, as we call him, reconquered Jerusalem in 1187, and this is the battle where it happened. So again, fantastic book series. I've got quite a few already. Like I said, they're not cheap, but if you do want to start and you do like individual battles, you do like depth and context, and you want to start a new collection, 100% pick this collection up. But I'm going to quickly have a look at some other ones for you. If you do exclusively like Culloden and Scottish history, then like I say, go to Scottish history tours and have a look at Bruce Fumy's videos, but look at some of the books I'm about to give you here. So one of them is called Jacobites by Jacqueline Ryden, A New History of the 45 Rebellion. Like I said, remember there's 3 different Jacobite uprisings. You've got 1689, 1715 and 1745. Okay, so you will get maybe one book that will encompass all of them, but some of them will be just individualated across different ones, because they were in their own right a lot different, each of them. But the 45 is the most well known because it was the last also. You've got this one called Fight the Throne. So this is a relatively new paperback edition by Christopher Duffy, who's a fantastic historian on the Jacobite Rising. 1715, The Great Jacobite Rebellion. This is by Daniel, I can't say his surname, I don't want to butcher that, Shecky, perhaps, I'm sorry if I butchered that, but this author is actually directly referenced within the Culloden book by Mary Pittock, so there is quite a lot of information, and a lot of his arguments and takes are actually in the book, whether they are supported or refuted as well. So here we have Culloden, Battle and Aftermath. This is a relatively new book as well by Paul O'Keefe. I've not read this yet, I've not bought it, and I will probably reserve my judgment until I see some more reviews coming in about this book. Then you've got John Preble, who is a stellar historian on Scottish history. Along with the Culloden book, you've got things like the Highland clearances, and there's a lot of other parts of Scottish history that John Preble has got fantastic books on as well. So definitely an author to keep an eye on. And this book, you can't go far wrong if you get this one. One of the books I've got as well, which is by Trevor Royal, so Culloden, Scotland's Last Battle, and the Forging of the British Empire. So like I was saying earlier on, this is a book where you not only look at the impact of the battle itself, but then later on the impact on the British state, on Scotland itself, and then subsequently what the actions of Culloden led to in terms of the American Revolution, the 7 Years' War, and the legacy then of those who fought in the 45 uprising. But the other one I wanted to always give a shout out to is the Essential Histories collection, which again is a fantastic collection which I've got too. I would say don't get these on Kindle, get them actually physical copy if you can. So this one is the Jacobite Rebellion, the 45 to 46, and this will give you pretty much a rundown of the entire uprising during that time. So as you can see what I was talking about earlier on with regards to the propaganda, look at that picture there. If you can see it, look at the picture. You have a on the left hand side you have where's it gone? Come on. So on the picture you have the Jacobites on the left hand side. They're all clad in tartan with sporrans and targets and broadswords, fighting against a regimented, disciplined, well dressed, organised British state army clad in their typical red Hanoverian coats. So again, just be wary of the propaganda, and when you do have a look at it, if you do have your own take, then definitely give me a comment, and I would very much appreciate it if you liked and subscribed to this video. I will give a rating for this book before I leave. So overall, I really love the quality of the writing, and I did learn a lot more than I thought I was going to, which is always a bonus when you buy a new book and spend quite a lot, especially on a new series too. So yeah, I'm going to give this 4 out of 5 stars overall. I mean, I know there's a lot of different books on Culloden with different angles and different arguments, but this is really deep. I will say that there is a significant amount of detail about which regiments were where and who did what. So if you don't like that type of stuff, then just bear with it. But if you do, then this is the book for you, certainly. I don't mind either way, but that's why I've given it 4 out of 5. I'm not really a huge fan of that type of detail, but still, I'd rather have it than not. So yeah, 4 out of 5 overall. Like I say, if you would mind liking the video, subscribe to the channel and share. But if you have a comment, then I would be very much interested to hear that.